Welcome to the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's horror fantasy series, The Strain. We are currently covering the series' third season on FX. I'm your host, Blaire Graves, the executive producer and host of Professional Geek Podcast, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, the editor-in-chief at TVBinges.com. You can find us on Twitter at Blaire Loves TV and at Kyle Loves TV, and you can follow this podcast's Twitter handle at The Strain Pod. Plus, don't forget to play hashtag The Strain Bingo with us every week for a chance to be on our show. Hi, Kyle. How you doing today?
Oh, Blaire, it's late and I feel like I'm just waking up from a nap. How about you?
Oh, I'm good. You and I live in the United States, and I opted to watch the presidential debate in lieu of The Strain, but now I am here and I'm ready to talk about The Strain, having caught it a little bit late.
I opted to follow the presidential debate on Twitter while watching The Strain, so...
Well, then we probably had about the same experience.
Yeah, probably.
But I'm glad to say that I am back with my voice being 90% better. You can probably still hear it a little bit off, but I am almost better. Thank you, everybody who tweeted that you're sorry that I was sick. That was very sweet to have all of those tweets.
You got the well wishes from the Strain Army.
I did, from our little fan base.
Yes.
Speaking of our little fan base, we are 7 followers away from 1,000 followers.
Hey!
So if you listen to the podcast but you don't follow us, do us a favor and go follow us right now at The Strain Pod.
Yeah, tweet stuff at us.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk about it on the show.
It's true. We're very interactive. Mm-hmm. Today, Kyle and I, you and I will be discussing Season 3, Episode 7, which is titled Collaborators. This episode was written by Chuck Hogan, who was one of the authors of the book series, as well as Glenn Whitman, who was formerly a writer for the cult television series Fringe. This is Glenn Whitman's first episode of The Strain. He has not been involved in the project at all up until now.
That makes sense to me. That if you had told me after watching this episode that a writer who had never written a Strain episode before wrote this episode, I would buy into that instantly.
Yeah.
This was a very strange episode to me. Not in the way that the Quinlan backstory episode with 50 AD ancient times Game of Thrones style was strange, but in just wow, so this is the direction they want to go with 4 episodes left in the season? 3 episodes?
3 episodes left.
3 episodes left in the season now?
There's 10 total.
Yeah, it was a very minor episode, I would say, on the whole. And just it really left me confused, not so much about story stuff, which is a new feeling, but more about just wow, so this is how they want to spend an hour, huh?
So did you not particularly like this episode?
Well, that's the thing. I didn't dislike the episode. I thought there were some good moments, although I think it missed on maybe its central. I think if you did an outline of the points this episode was making, I think its main point it missed on, but I think it hit some of the minor points, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of them as we go. But I don't think this episode was as effective as it could have been, but I also think that it had good moments and interesting moments and was effective at times. So I guess I'm kind of lukewarm on it. What did you think?
This is one of my top 3 or 4 episodes of The Strain.
Well, I'm very interested. Yeah. Well, I'm interested now.
I loved this episode, but I think a lot of that was from a pacing perspective and from a getting where I want to actually be when I'm going through this show with these characters' perspective. Not necessarily that it was an appropriate episode for where we are in the season or where our story is. Absolutely not. It was totally inappropriate. But in terms of what I wanted The Strain to be, it pretty much checked off everything that I wanted. It was pretty stellar use of, just environment, camera, set pieces, costume design. Like, just from an aesthetic perspective, it was like probably my favorite probably actually my favorite, more than even Creatures of the Night. But that Creatures of the Night wasn't an aesthetic episode for me. It was a writing episode. And then from the perspective of actually like spending time with our characters and letting them do the things that they do well, and doing the types of heroics that they all do well, and letting them have conversations with one another that have to do with what's happening, but are also familiar and friendly and like they are actually a team. And then I also really liked, the kind of the jump at the end with Palmer getting the white for the first time, and the way that he negotiated himself through that entire situation. It was just like all around to me, it was a very tight episode, and it did exactly what I want from The Strain. Not in order. This should be like episode 3 of the season, not episode 7. But like, it was what I want this show to be like every episode. Obviously, like, it could have used more scares because it is a horror show. But other than that, I thought it was perfectly paced and aesthetically right where I wanted it to be.
I agree with about 5% of what you just said. So that's interesting. I this is, to me, not what I want The Strain to be, which makes sense because I enjoyed the last episode, even though it was really stupid. As we broke down on the podcast, to me, this is not what the show does well, and I don't think this episode was executed especially well. The aesthetics, I will cede to you. I don't think The Strain has ever been visually interesting enough for me to even consider that, to be honest. I consider it for individual scenes, individual moments of great scares, or particularly good, set design or whatever, but I don't think there has ever been an episode of The Strain where I walked away and said, oh, that episode was really visually interesting. Like, for example, I just watched, or I guess a few days ago, I watched the Westworld pilot, and it's like, to me, that's a visually interesting show. Or Hannibal, or Mad Men, or like those are to me visually. The Strain.
Oh, I'm not trying to compare them to those.
I'm not saying I'm not saying that though. I'm saying that there's a bar you have to clear in my mind to be visually interesting, and I'm not willing to give The Strain its own like special bar that it has to clear to be. I mean, in comparison to other Strain episodes, I can see that. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if this episode was more visually interesting than a sort of particularly good week of CSI or Law and Order, which to me is sort of the normal level of which The Strain operates. And I wonder how much of you liking this episode was due to, I think, your previously established enjoyment of flashbacks to the particular time period that we flashed back to in this episode.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a nerd for Nazi Germany, and I know that sounds really dark. But like, as a person, like, when I was in college, that's what I studied for a whole year, and I moved to Germany so that I could study it. Like, you are probably correct. Like, that if you put me in that time period, I'm going to be a nerd for it, just because I think it's a fascinating period of history. And, one of the reasons I was attracted to the book series of The Strain was the dramatization of what if the Nazis were actually trying to accomplish something much more supernatural. So that is a fair thing to throw into my court.
Well, no, I'm just saying that there's. It just, to me, okay. Well, let me get to my. Let me not beat around the bush here. I want to get to my chief complaint about this episode. When I mentioned, I don't think it got I don't think it got its main thrust right. This is what I'm talking about. We start the episode, or near the start of the episode. Well, actually, in the previously on, we reckon back to that scene from 2 seasons ago when Fett and his father had a conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, where we met him for all of like a scene.
Yeah, like, so Fett's father has literally played a one-scene role in this story to date in like 35 episodes or whatever. This is not what I would call a well-established relationship on the show. And this is not a relationship that has affected Fett in any noticeable way that has been explicitly said to us. Maybe you could draw some conclusions about how his relationship with his father affects Fett's outlook on life, but considering that he's been Nicolas Cage for most of this season, to me, there isn't a lot of, like, nuance in the way Fett has been portrayed for a while now. And so I guess it's a noble goal to try to give some of that, but also I am not connecting those dots. In terms of, like, the way that Fett has behaved on this show for the last 20 episodes, I see no resemblance between that and the backstory we received about his grandfather and father. And furthermore, we spent a very large portion of this episode in the Nazi Germany flashback. And I think that material was actually interesting. Like, I'm granting you that. Like, I liked that. I liked seeing Eichhorst, but all the stuff about Eichhorst was already established. We weren't learning anything new about Eichhorst. So the whole thing is so that we learn something about Fett through what turns out to be his grandfather, I believe, who was in this, who the whole story, I mean, if you watch the episode, you know it, I don't need to rehash it, but volunteered to be in this, like, sort of special Nazi squad, and his job ended up being executing his fellow detainees, and his comrade gets executed because he at first hesitates to do that. And it's like, okay, well, that's pretty powerful. Like, that's a powerful scene. It's a powerful story. I understand it. The connection to present-day Fett is so tenuous and contrived that I don't know how anyone could get any value out of it. There's, like, he talks about how his father didn't want him to be an exterminator because of this, but he exterminates rodents and bugs, and, like, he's not a parole officer or something. I just don't, like, that connection between the contents of that scene, of that flashback, and the relationship between Fett and his father, who again wasn't directly involved in this scene, it was his grandfather, is to me so, pardon the pun, strained, that I don't understand the relevance even a little bit.
Well, so that's the thing when I say that the timing was inappropriate. Like, I am not on the opposite side of the coin with you on that. I think you're 100% right. But that doesn't stop it from being something that I enjoyed and would have wanted from the show I wanted it to be. Does that make sense? Like, this... Because we talked about this last week, and this is something that I've started to, like, adjust to even prior to us talking about it, was that each episode, I don't know what I'm getting or who I'm getting, because each writer has absolutely no idea how to seamlessly write between one another. They have no idea how to make episode. Every episode is a standalone, this is the version of Fett I'm going to get. So, like, when I have Chuck Hogan, I know that I'm going to get a more emotional Fett, and I know that I'm going to get a more drunk F, like a more like a more like not thinking about himself, or rather thinking about himself too much and drinking too much F. Like, I know who and what I'm getting from that writer. So when I saw his name come up, I wasn't surprised, I guess, when I got an emotional Fett, when I got background story, because Chuck Hogan, one of the authors of the books, cares about where his characters came from, and he cares about, like, making sure that material is known. So I guess I've started to adjust my viewing habits of this show to, like, what I'm expecting from each writer, which is weird because now I'm starting to, like, see their names and groan, or see their names and get really excited. So I agree. Like, it was inappropriately timed, and it doesn't make any sense given, like, it's been between 20 and 30 episodes that we last addressed Fett's father. But on the other side, we definitely have been developing throughout this entire season, especially, a father-like kinship that Fett and Satrakian have with one another, and I think that was appropriate for them to have, if not just, like, weirdly suddenly placed. Like there wasn't any rev up to it. It just suddenly was there.
Yeah.
So I'm probably being a little confusing.
But you're right, and I think it's important to bring up that the reaffirming the father-son relationship between Satrakian and Fett is something the show needed to do a while back. But it's better late than never. And our characters need connections between them, especially with F sort of marooned with Dutch on their own sort of social island. Like, we need positive relationships on this show that aren't romantic. You know, that's what the strain really needs, is like teamwork relationships. And so seeing, you know, Abe and Fett have that moment is good. I can't get past, and I guess, okay, because you're talking about like adjusting your expectations based on writers. I learned about the writers when you say their names on the podcast to me live, as you did 5 minutes ago. What I adjust my strain expectations based on is what the episode is intending to do. And the last couple episodes, for example, were intending to be action movies. They were siege episodes. They were tunnel episodes. You know, there's lots of fighting and, you know, and scary stuff. And if the show wants to be that, then I'm going to judge it like an action movie, which is I'm going to forgive a lot of bad dialogue. I'm going to forgive a lot of nonsensical stuff. We're going to make fun of it on the podcast, but as I said last week, I enjoyed last week's episode, even though we pointed out about 10 things that were utterly nonsense about it. It's like, because I'm judging it like an action movie, like a Nicolas Cage movie, as I've referenced 50 times. Like, that's, to me, like what the show wants to be is how I'm going to judge it. This version of the strain, which had close to literally no action in it, if the strain wants to be a more considered and thoughtful show, I am going to judge it as such. And if you give me a considered and thoughtful version of the strain, and the main A story, this flashback, is so sloppily tied to the point it's trying to make about the characters that I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I don't know. I mean, I will agree. It was well executed as a flashback. Like the material was executed well. I liked all the actors brought in for the flashback. I thought the flashback story itself was easy to follow. You have to hammer the nail in with why this matters. If I'm going to see a flashback, it needs to matter in a very clear way. And I think in sometimes in the past, the strain has done that and helped us like illuminate character traits. I think the flashback to Satrakian and how he dealt with the Strigoi doctor, burying him at sea to be alive forever at the bottom of the ocean, like that tells me meaningful information about the Satrakian character that I feel like enhances my view of him. I don't know what this told me about Fett. The one prior scene I had with the father told me he and his father didn't have a good relationship. This tells me, I guess, why, but I don't really know why. I mean, there was a couple throwaway lines of dialogue after it that told me more than the entire 25 minutes of flashbacks told me. I don't get it. I don't get what I was supposed to take.
I mean, part of me thinks that there's a greater arc being built around Icarus right now because, I mean, being handless, he's, you know, I guess in the danger zone, as it were. Okay. And to remind us of who he is and where he comes from. Like, not that we necessarily need that reminder, but it's interesting. I mean, we've had
Icarus flashbacks to Nazi stuff before, and he's always been terrible. Like 100% of the time, when we flash back to Nazi times, it's gonna be Icarus being terrible.
Right.
I don't know what did we learn? But, like, tell me what we learned about Icarus as a character from this.
But we did also see the face of Fett's grandfather, who we've been told committed suicide, but there's a possibility that's not true. That could be something that comes back as, you know, if they're going to try to decide to make Fett the heart of the show too, maybe he's like a Nazi vampire who's in tandem with Icarus or something. Like there's opportunities for further storytelling down the line, I guess, is sort of where I took it. Like,
sure. No,
like I didn't see it as like an end point so much as like an establishment of something.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be. I'm grasping at straw.
No, yeah, but the point of, I mean, it's an hour-long episode of television, and it was structured as a reveal of Fett's past, and it basically was like Fett's story, his origin story of like how he got here. You know, and how, and honestly, it was explaining this relationship between he and his father, a character who has appeared in one prior episode, and who the audience has, like, probably immediately forgot, and who is never mentioned by Fett in any dialogue as he was going on romantic adventures with Dutch and becoming an action hero. Like, it was set up poorly, and all, I mean, poorly. It was virtually non-existent, the setup. It was set up in as little as possible, and then it was executed well, but then it was tied in sloppily. It's the bracketing on that is wrong. Like if they had really made a strong connection about why this is affecting Fett and who he is and how this like changes things for him, like how it changes our perception of him, like, yeah, give me the exact same material but make that connection explicit and let me feel that. It's instead, like, to me this was such a dud in terms of the final, like, tying the bow on it. Like I want to know how this matters, because I feel like I watched this, affecting flashback scenes, and I just don't know why any of that matters. And I get it that you're like, okay, maybe there's like plot mechanics coming up, but boy, that doesn't seem like it matters right now. And it seems like also if they had wanted those plot mechanics to come up, they didn't have to devote 2/3 of this episode to it. They could have just had him reference it. They could have just had the scene where he goes by and he sees his father, and have like the lines of dialogue that occurred after the flashback between he and Satrakian, and be done with it in like 2.5 minutes. And it's like that would set up stuff. That would remind the audience of who the father is and the relationship, and give us some more information. Like, why did the flashbacks exist is my main issue. Like, why couldn't that have been entirely told through dialogue that would have been 2 minutes long and involved finding his parents' bodies? And like, is it like, I just don't get it. I don't get why we spend all this time with the flashbacks if there wasn't like a really strong tie-in to why it matters.
Can I give my fanfic conspiracy theory?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I am mostly of the opinion now that everything we thought about, or everything, I'm not going to make you complicit, everything I thought about Feraldo being a supervillain is probably wrong. But
yes, no, I agree.
In the event that she is on the path to supervillainy,
okay,
this would be a great tie-in for Fett's grandfather accidentally getting pulled into the Nazis, and then Fett accidentally gets pulled into Feraldo the same way. Yeah.
Well, no, I dig that. I think that's probably too clever for the show, but I dig it. I like it.
Some parallel storytelling, some parallel lives for these family members and stuff.
I am always up for parallel storytelling, and if that happens, I will be sure to praise it in the episode in which it happens. But it's like, if I can only judge what I see, and the show knows it's on once a week. It's not a Netflix show. It knows that when it's in production. And if you give me a lot of flashbacks and then do a really poor job about tying the exterminator point in and making it feel meaningful, I don't know what I'm supposed to think about that.
But like, remember the Zach scene where he walks in on Kelly eating a boy that looks just like him? And
yes.
then they took like 2 episodes to address that?
Yes.
Like that's just, I guess I'm trying to give the strain the benefit of the doubt that they're not good at like fulfilling what they're trying to do per episode.
That's true. But was there, I'm genuinely asking, was there any indication in the flashback that the grandfather is still alive?
We didn't see him die. That's the indication.
Okay, so it's just kind of left unsaid.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, maybe. That would provide those scenes with meaning. It still doesn't change the fact that it's like, boy, it seems like with a little more like work, they could have figured out a tie-in that resonated more. Because you're not addressing that. Like why am I missing something about like why this mattered to who Fett is? Like, because I was really trying to follow the dialogue about him being an exterminator and how that angered his father, and it just to me read as nonsense.
Well, the thing you have to remember about Fett, and I know they said it on the show for sure, but I also know that they elaborate on it more in the books. The thing you have to remember about Fett is that like he had like a scholarship to like an Ivy League school. He was supposed to like go be like a lawyer type, and he chose to be an exterminator because that's something he was good at and he had a knack for, and it interested in him, and he was fascinated by how creatures, hide and how they populate and colonize and all that stuff. So like for him, it was just an intellectual fascination that he had to pursue. I don't know that ties in to what we're talking about exactly, yes. but in terms of like talking about the disappointment of his father and things like that, I mean, if you think about it from the point of, I could have had a lawyer son who was going to fight justice for people who have bad things happen to them, but I have a son who is doing something remarkably similar to the sins of my father. It's not said. It should have been.
It's not remarkably similar. That's the root of my problem, is that being a pest exterminator is not the same as being an executioner in a Nazi camp, and it's not even samey enough for me to make a connection. Like, you're killing rats, like rodents. If they had, I mean, geez, like, that is such a stretch. Like, he's not, it's like, that's not the same. He's not, it would seem like there are many more jobs. Like, if he was a prison guard or something, that would sort of trigger that more. But the idea that he's just going around, I mean, I guess killing as a general idea, but he's an exterminator for the benefit of humanity. Like, he is doing a positive job that is needed in society. It's like I just don't. It's just very hard for me to buy into the idea that Fett's fought that because I'm already like, from season 1, I'm already bought into everything about Fett's father being disappointed in him. Like, that to me was very efficient backstory and effective backstory when it was told in season 1 about how, I mean, the piece of information that Fett was an Ivy League student before he dropped out to pursue this is a very important character trait that I still remember to this day when watching the character. Like, that is a very crucial piece of character information. I don't know what layering on top of that the Nazi stuff does for me right now. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to take from that regarding his character, and like you said, unless we have some kind of reveal coming about his grandfather's secret identity, and this whole thing was just to, like, stealth introduce that character, I just don't know what I got from this. I don't know what I'm going to take for it. I don't know why. I don't know how this changes my opinion of Fett. All it really did was reestablish the previously established relationship between Fett and Abe. It's like, well, that could have been done quicker. Like, we had to spend 1/10 of the season doing that. Like, that's what we spent our time on in the 7th episode. To me, it's like just a weird allocation of time for a point that isn't very lucid. It's a muddy point they're making, and it's like, if you're gonna spend a lot of time making a sort of fine character point, okay, great. It better be a good one. You better be making a really key point,
The other thing that we, not that The Strain does a good job of doing things that other TV shows do, but TV shows do project, very often they project when a character will be killed. And often that is done by reestablishing how emotionally important they are to the show. So I'm not saying that anybody's going to die. I have no insider knowledge of what they're doing in the TV show, because they have strayed so far from the books in terms of what happens when, that I have no way of projecting anything. But I mean, that's the other thing that you could take from this, is that could be a setup for a character death. I mean, that is, at least in sci-fi shows, it is extraordinarily common to remind us of why we liked a character an episode or two before they die. And I think it's a pretty hard, fast rule with television in general. But I don't know. Is that something that you could see, like, as?
Well, I guess to me, like, if you're, because I'm with you on, like, the. It's okay, yeah, I know sci-fi shows do that. I mean, geez, The Wire was famous for that. Before a character died, he would have, like, a really thoughtful speech he would give, and then he'd be killed within 5 minutes. This wasn't like a Fett flashback, though. It was to his grandfather, and then used to explain the negative relationship between Fett and his father, who has appeared on screen once for 5 minutes.
Fett's not necessarily the character who's gonna die, though, because it was reestablishing his relationship with Satrakian. So
yeah, okay.
I mean, that's like it was, hey, my father is dead. You're my father figure. Yeah,
like, no,
there's
true.
options. Is all I'm saying.
Well, no, so Satrakian would be the natural choice, and I think a lot of this season is geared towards that potentially happening. I think that character also is the least crucial main character at this point.
Satrakian?
Not in terms of story, but in terms of how the show works. I don't think they necessarily need him. I think Quinlan can do a lot of that stuff. Since they both read the Lumen, I think Quinlan is a more kinetic character. You know, because Satrakian, like, you're putting an old man in sword fights. Like, I don't know. It's, like, to me, like, because both he and Quinlan was quoting things from the Lumen in this episode. I think they could kill Satrakian and the show would not necessarily fundamentally change. Because Quinlan is now, like, he's working with F and Dutch, like, they're integrating him into the story. He has all this knowledge over the centuries. He has access to the Lumen. Like, if they wanted to effectively replace Satrakian with Quinlan, I think that would be a pretty clean swap for the show in terms of just the role they play on the show. So I think that's possible, but also, like, again, like, this is the best way to do that. Like, okay, so if the stated goal is, like, let's give us warm fuzzies about Abe and remind us why we're going to miss him, I'm down for that if they're planning to kill him. But it's like, well, this was 25 minutes of flashback about Fett's grandfather leading into a 30-second scene where Abe comforts him. That's our big Abe moment. Like, it seems like if that was the goal, then we could have done that more efficiently, or, you know, in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I certainly didn't leave this episode thinking like, oh, Abe's the greatest father figure ever. I was like, hey, that was a nice scene between those two. You know, it's like, again, it could have been. I don't know what. I guess I don't know what would have changed this episode if we didn't have the flashbacks at all. At all. Remove them entirely from this episode. I don't know what changes even a little bit about like my takeaway from this episode. And I liked the flashbacks. Like, in and of themselves, I liked them. I just don't get why we spent so much time on them in an episode that had no other action. Like I guess that's my problem. Is like, this one kind of bored me. Like, in the end.
I think that's a perfectly fine place to come from with it, and I don't ever expect people to be like all aboard the artsy train like I am. There was a lot of cool camera work in this episode. I had to like go and look at the director. I was really like but I also think that it to most people would probably be boring. And also, if I had been tweeting at the same time, I might have also been bored. It was like a lot of it. For me, a lot of my enjoyment of a television show rests on how much I'm actually paying attention. And sometimes with the strain, people tweet us so much that I lose like 5% of the episode. Not that much, just a little bit. But yeah, no, but I can understand your perspective, and I'm not going to like fault you for it. And I also, like, you've kind of pulled me further onto your side. Not fully,
I don't want to ruin your enjoyment of the episode. I
know. My very rare.
I love that you found a Strain episode to love.
I know, because it's been a while.
Choice for me.
Well, so I guess one of the other reasons that I'm like wondering about all these things I'm hypothesizing is because traditionally the Strain gives, I'm looking at it, it actually looks like they give 2 episodes at a time per director. So, like, supposedly the 2 episodes at a time are supposed to kind of connect, as it were. Okay. And the next episode will also be directed by this director. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, is there something there?
Yeah. No, I think your theory about bringing the grandfather back is about as generous a reading of this episode as it can be. Because if that happens, then it's like, oh, well, this was clearly to set that up and introduce that character, and that makes sense. They definitely should have, if that is the way they're going, which I would say is like a 10% chance. But if that is the way they're going, then they definitely should have set that up in this episode so we could have been excited about it.
Right.
Which is one thing the Strain doesn't do very well. Like, doesn't manage the audience's emotions very well. Like, what am I supposed to look forward to going forward? Like, where are we, Blaire? Right. Like, story-wise, where are we?
It's very much the inverse of, like, what True Blood did. True Blood would always basically, like, start its next episode at the very end of every episode. So, like, the moment you jumped in, that scene was there. You like jumped into a scene that you'd already gotten into. Whereas the scene, like, the strain puts like very specific, diligent bookmarks at the beginning and end of every episode. So they don't flow into one another, and that's, you know, one of the pacing issues that the show has. And frankly, I mean, now that I'm learning, looking at all this, that two directors, like a director does 2 episodes at a time, like that's just appalling to me. They bookend so much, because you'd think that the director would be like, oh, I know where I'm going with this next episode, so I'll make sure that I have a little lead. No, this show does no lead in. So I have no idea where we're going, and I don't really necessarily know where we came from.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what was this? Like, okay, so like, real, like, just to be practical about it. Like, okay, so F and Dutch are still on this communication center thing. They bring in Quinlan, and they decide.
Yeah!
Yes, right. That's a nice trio of characters, by the way. F, Dutch, and Quinlan is I think a kind of fun trio, and they go. They partake in what is my favorite scene of the episode, which is when they go through the city and it's freaking chaos. I really enjoyed that. Like, I think if there's one thing this show has done better this season, although it's been inconsistent about it, it's making us feel like the city is in chaos.
Oh yeah, that's one of the reasons that I love this episode so much, by the way. I know we haven't gotten to it yet. But, like, it was the fact that, like, stuff's messed up. Like, and they showed it.
Yeah. I really liked that. I really liked that scene where they try to break up a fight and Quinlan just sort of casually kills 5 people. or 3
human beings. He casually killed like 3 to 5 human beings.
Yeah, I mean, he's not trying to de-escalate situations. He doesn't have time for that. This other stuff's more important. I like that Quinlan is sort of the manifestation of, like, okay, let's move the plot along, guys. Let's not get caught up in side stories, you know. And that scene where, like, the moment when he extends his stinger to lick the blood off his sword is one of those cool visual moments that I'll remember. Yeah, like that moment was really cool, and that's one of the things I'll take from this episode. And that scene was really neat because it just made me think, like, yeah, this is real chaos in the city. And I wish the episode would have been about that. Like, that's what I want to see. I want to see those guys figuring stuff out, because it seems like F, Dutch, and Quinlan are the ones that are actually doing something. They decide that they need to collect the black box from episode 1 from the original flight, because it'll have a recording. They think that they can somehow isolate or identify in some way of the Master's communication with his followers, and so therefore they can attempt to disrupt that communication or mimic it for some purpose. But it's like, okay, that's the story of the show. Like, that the attempts to stop the Master are like the premise of the strain. Is like, the Master has arrived, we need to stop him. So F, Dutch, and Quinlan are like on that story. The other stuff in this episode, I just don't get. Like, I'm all for side stories, I'm all for character development, but you're spending that much time developing, like, this really weak connection to the character. Like,
that's so funny, because for me, like, with them going to get the black box, I was like, this is reaching.
Really? Now, why is that?
Yes,
I know why that is, but yeah, okay, explain it.
No, because it's like a pseudo fake scientific thing that they just decided to make true of the show, that suddenly they can understand their communications, and like the communications department of like the military didn't figure that out. It was like these two kind of doofuses who have, like, one of them has biological intelligence, no tech intelligence, and one of them has, like, tech intelligence but no biological intelligence, and there's no reason for me to believe that they have any intersection to figure this out together. Like I would think they would be speaking completely different languages to each other.
No, I asked you that question, and then for the first time tonight, I thought about the answer. I was like, oh yeah, that's all ridiculous.
Yeah.
I guess this is what I'm saying. It's like, when the strain is operating like when it's dealing and moving forward, like, it's like, okay, we gotta get towards this goal of, like, confronting the Master and stopping stuff. It's like, I'm willing to forgive the stupid, like, if this episode had been about that, we would be joking about how stupid all of that was. It's like how stupid the black box thing is, and like how contrived that is. But it's also like, yeah, they're doing stuff. I like seeing those three together. The stinger scene was awesome. You know, it's great that like F is useful again, and Dutch is not like actively detracting from the show like she has so many times. Like, there's so much, like, to me, that is so much more interesting. It's bringing so much more to the table for us to talk about than a flashback scene that doesn't strongly connect to anything. Like, it's just like a flashback for the sake of having a flashback as it stands now. Again, maybe future plot developments notwithstanding. You know, like it's like, to me, like, if the show is like moving forward in a way, then I can forgive so much. But if it wants to really hunker down and give me a character scene, then I'm gonna judge it to a higher standard because it's being boring, and so I'm going to judge it to like my boring show standard, which is you better be really like well written and interesting. And The Strain is absolutely not that, and that's the problem.
No, I know. I mean, in terms of just like being fun and exciting and like getting up and doing stuff and going on a quest and going to your checkpoint and coming back, like, yeah, it was great. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it was fun. I'll remember it. Like, but there was a part of me that just went like, okay, you do that. Like, yeah. that's just like where I was with that part. But it was fun, and it was cool to like be reminded of Jim, and like to go back where we started and all that. Like, there's some important little, you know, there's some important little things that they've done in there to remind us of where we've been. Based on the episode titles of the next 3 episodes.
Oh, really?
I think I have a very clear vision of why they did all of that stuff. But that would lead into spoiler territory for the books. But it's something that you know about. We'll have to talk offline about it.
This to me is like, I hate it. I hate this like future game. Like it's just so. This is so not what television is. This is like a freaking comic book movie franchise, which is my least favorite thing in the world. It's like this stupid, like, okay, we're setting this up for the next one, you better watch the next one, and but they're not even doing it in like the TV way where we were talking about, like, you know, they're like, let's have a cliffhanger at the end of the episode and then pick it up in the next episode and keep you interested. It's like, it's more like we're foreshadowing plot developments that the diehards will know about. There is nothing in entertainment I hate more than that. Like, yeah. How about this? How about making an interesting hour of television? Just full stop, period, end of story. How about just making good television? Like, is that like too much to ask? Like, we have to in order to find meaning in an episode, we have to decode the episode titles? Like, why?
Oh, and that's a problem I've had with The Strain the whole time, is that they keep like going. Like, they keep pushing toward these things that work for people like me, but then, like, it's very... If you're trying to make sense of it, it's a very confusing show. If you're just buying in, like, here's my money, I'm getting a ticket to the show, and I'm just going to enjoy whatever I see. If you're buying in, which apparently a lot of people are on Twitter, then it's a great time. But if you are actually trying to think about what happens from episode to episode, I can't imagine, like, just going with the flow, and that's obviously what you and I deal with on this podcast all the time.
Yeah, no, that's the theme of our podcast, but also, like, I think the other theme is that when the show is action-oriented, when the show plays like an action movie, we sort of forgive that stuff, and we can joke about it and make fun of the silliness, but it's the same way you would joke about, like, Con Air or something. It's like, ultimately, like, I'm psyched to see that movie. like that's, it's like... It's episodes like this when the show really tries to be something more. You know, it's like, this episode to me was The Strain trying to be something more, which is admirable, and they're just bad at it.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's, we've talked for a long time now. It's like, ultimately, in my opinion, and I know you disagree because you like the episode, but it's like, this kind of television, the people who make The Strain are not good at it. they just aren't. Like they've tried this a few times now, and in my estimation, none of them have been particularly good.
Yeah.
It's like they can get it for scenes. They can do really good scenes, but in terms of putting together a coherent, high-quality episode of television, I think the only time they've done that is in the premiere of this season. Because even like our beloved Creatures of the Night, that was just The Strain being an action movie. And that was The Strain being a good act. That was like The Rock, as opposed to like Con Air. Like in terms of the Nicolas Cage action movies, like that was a good, tight action movie that made a reasonable amount of sense and was just really excellent. Like,
man, you and I watch different action movies.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Everyone knows this. But it's like that was like it was like a Thor movie, right?
Okay,
I saw your beloved Thor movie the other day, by the way, and I thought it was pretty good.
Okay, good. Yeah, because it's done by a Shakespearean director and writer. Yeah. And he made it like really nice and fluffy and wonderful and like really like smart and not just like I blah 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 blah.
Smart is a little further than I'm going to go, but in terms of like just being an effective means of like getting across the points they wanted to get across, I thought it was like pretty good. I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, like, it's a pretty good movie. That's good.
Yeah.
But that's what The Strain, like, okay, it's like, if The Strain wants to be a pretty good action movie, yeah, please, do that. But when The Strain tries to be this meaningful show that has characters that don't just say catch lines and speak in quips where they say boom boom every 3 seconds. Like if we want to buy into Fett as someone more, there has to be a more coherent vision of that character, and I don't feel like they have that. Like I feel like there is no like real meaningful like profound idea behind that character, and I thought this episode was an attempt to conjure that from whole cloth, and it failed. Like to me, the central goal of this episode was to make Fett a 3-dimensional character. And it flat out, in my opinion, failed to do that. And that's my assessment of the episode.
I think that is really perfectly fair. Like, I'm not going to fault you on that. I guess where it landed for me was, like, I felt like the episode harkened back to trying to remember the name of the characters. I mean, like, the characters from season 1 were like Joan Less, the lawyer.
Oh my gosh,
I know, going all the way back. Like, was his name Hans or something? The guy who was who locked himself. Like I thought that. I mean, that's kind of where I landed. Is like this kind of harkened back to that type of material. Like, it's not the same at all in any way, shape, or form. But like, in terms of like what is effective for me and what I want. Like I'm unchanged in that opinion. I mean, I agree with like you've helped me see some holes a little bit more, but in terms of like that's something that I really enjoyed about it when season 1 came out, and then it became this weird action movie that absolutely makes no sense between episodes. And then it kind of went back a little bit more to this thing that I really liked when it was in season 1. So that's, I mean, but I hear you. I'm okay. I hear you. And you know what? Hey.
I'm glad that we've gotten back to our traditional podcast roles of you enjoying what we watch and me not enjoying what we watch. This is like a warm blanket. This is really like vintage Blaire and Kyle, where I'm grouchy and upset, and you are very positive about the episode and sort of trying to console me. This is our classic relationship. I feel like with The Strain we've kind of strayed from those roles.
Right, it's a throwback, Kyle.
Yeah, no, this is how we traditionally are. Like when we envisioned this podcast before the show started, this is how we thought every episode would be.
Yeah, it would just be Blaire being super stoked all the time and you being not, and then it ended up being so bad that I couldn't be stoked. I'm such a positive person, guys.
Yeah.
Like there's not like when I don't like something, I will like drag it through the mud, but drag it through the mud and light it on fire. But until it gets to that point, I'm a really like chill. Like I'm gonna enjoy it. Whereas I've always loved debating with you, so I'm glad to be back to it. I agree with you. Yeah, I'm not gonna say that you're not a positive person, but different type.
I think I'm probably, I don't know what I am in terms of like TV. You know, like just I feel like I really try to calibrate my expectations for shows based on what I think the shows are trying to do. And so I'll like a lot of dumb shows that I feel like aren't trying to do that much, but do what they are trying to do well. And I will be very, very critical of quote-unquote smart shows that are trying to be like prestige television. Because I think what they're trying to do is a lot, and even if they accomplish 75% of that, I might not be happy with it. So I guess for me, like, when I don't like an episode like this, it's kind of stemming from that I feel like the strain is trying to transcend what it normally is. And so I'm holding it to a higher standard than I normally would hold it, and in my mind, like, under those standards, it just crumbles. Like, it's, if I apply those standards.
You know what? And I think that you and I have the same approach, but for different things. Whereas yours is like if a show's trying to be super intelligent and smart and trying to have some kind of like social message or something like that. And I have that intersection with social that you do. Whereas for me, it's a little bit more like, how do they utilize themes of things that I'm interested in? How do they incorporate science fiction or fantasy the way that I think is effective and smart, and not just like the everyday drudge that you see all the time? Like we're doing the same things but with different categories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think that is an effective way to put it. And yeah, we all watch TV and weight things differently.
Yeah. And that's, hey, you know what? Everybody should listen to our 12 Monkeys podcast, because we do this there too.
Yeah, no, that's a much more serious show too.
That is a much more serious show that we keep bouncing back and forth on how we feel about.
I think you ended it last season. If I remember right, you were the negative one at the end of last season of 12 Monkeys.
They did that thing I don't like in sci-fi stuff. That's why. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's like, we like that show because we think it's smart and it's different and unique and it's incredibly well paced and the acting is phenomenal. It's like all these things that The Strain is not. But then they did this thing at the end of season 2 where I was just like, y'all gotta get your stuff together.
This is helping make it clear though, and this is not in any way a judgment, and it will probably sound as such when I say it, but I do not mean this as any kind of judgment, which is that a large portion of your opinion is informed by plot development. Which is to say, like, if a show hits certain plot points you like or dislike, that will inform your opinion a lot. Which I feel like is how a lot of people watch TV. But then other people watch TV like I do, which is, I think, more, I want to say, like, holistically, but more like it's more like I cannot name a single plot point that would affect my opinion on a TV show. Like, if a show has a pregnancy plot line, for example, that does nothing for me either way. If the show has a kid who, you know, has, like, a troublesome kid, it's like, well, that's a trope, but it's like, I'm not going to, like, that presence of the kid doesn't make any difference to me, because there are plenty of shows that have troublesome kids that I really like. It's like, I don't think there's a single, like, plot element that sways my opinion in any way. And I think that might be a big thing in when we differ on episodes. Like, this episode had your World War II Nazi stuff that was, in my opinion, well executed. Like, in my telling of it, like, that stuff was effective material in a vacuum. It's like, well, that, I feel like that probably weighs heavily, and whereas, you know, for me, it's more like tone and expectations and sort of more esoteric stuff that I have trouble explaining sometimes. And it's not that one way is better or worse than the other way. It's just I think that explains differences in opinion in a way.
Yeah, and I also I totally agree with that. Like, for me, like, having, you know, you talk about tropes and things like that. When I went to study film and study all these other things, it's like, I'm interested in the cast of characters and the way that they're utilized and the way that these different plots that all have their own different names and theories and theorists behind them and all that stuff. Like, that's the stuff that I'm always, like, really interested in, which is why 12 Monkeys, I was like, it's based on my favorite Greek mythology thing. I love that. And you're much more interested in all the other aspects of it. So I think think you're right on the money, that there's just things that hit the right beat for me, and then there's, and I don't think it's incorrect to say that you might be just a little more objective than I am.
I don't think that's objective though, because there are definitely things I'm biased towards. They're just not plot elements. They're like character beats. Like again, my stupid thing about like if they're in a tunnel, I'm gonna like the episode.
Right.
like it's not a plot thing, because if they were having conversations in a tunnel, I would hate the episode. It's like what I mean is like if they're killing stuff, it's like I'm glad. Like I like action-y episodes, and I think I would have liked this episode if I felt like the sort of final dismount was more gracefully executed. Like stuff like that, and it's like that's I think that's a more interesting way of categorizing our critical styles than just what I said earlier about you being positive and me being negative. Like that I think is actually the first time like we're hitting on a more accurate way of how we see shows. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably informs our opinions more than sort of generic optimism or pessimism that we both have.
Well, it makes our debate great fun because...
At least for us. Jeez, we talked too long. I'm sorry.
No, I know, everybody, this is a long episode, but hey, you got to learn a little bit about us as people.
We never disagree. We have, like, different opinions, but we never actually disagree on things. So.
Well, not on this one.
Good point.
This is our third fan podcast together, and we have almost certainly we have more to come.
I don't think we ever cared about Grimm enough to disagree on Grimm.
There were a couple things that I think you and I disagreed on, but for the most part, and then with 12 Monkeys, obviously they took a turn that I'm not. Yeah. I'm not about, but that's just because I'm not. We're not doing 12 Monkeys right here.
We've already talked too long.
Okay. All right. So, sorry, everybody. Thank you for listening to all that.
Thank you.
There was the string bingo was achieved tonight.
My gosh, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, I do. We had a photo finish at the end of two winners, and the our official winner. Well, actually, our official winner was the two of them. And do you have their names, Blaire? I know our old friend Michael Cancelero was one of them.
Yep. And then at Carpe Diem Court, as in C-O-U-R-T, Carpe Diem Court. She was our second winner, who I think we declared winner because she might have been like right before him.
Yeah, I declared them co-winners because I was the timeline of the events was you were watching the debate, so you weren't as quick informing me of things as usual. I'm too lazy to check the official account, so the timeline was messed up. I just declared them co-winners. They both had the exact same bingo at around the same time, so they both won. The bingo was tears were shed, which happened in the flashback. A near sting or miss, which was one action scene of the episode, and when Abe and Fett were going into their apartment building, and there was this going in the hallway, nearly missed. Abe chopped her, I think. The free square, an explosion, which I ruled on as qualifying due to the explosion of the safe. It didn't look like it was going to be a big explosion, but then the sound effect made it seem like one, and so I ruled
And the camera shook.
Yes, the camera shook. There was a big sound effect. I said, fine, that's a big enough explosion. Fett, what are you doing carrying around all this dynamite? And then, of course, flashbacks was a square that was checked about 25 times this episode.
Yeah. Somebody tried to say that the one on the left side was too. The tears are shed, oxidolumin, because it was brought up. I don't know if that counts.
It doesn't count. Has to appear, or a page has to appear, like something. There has to be a physical representation of the lumen.
Then it didn't quite make it, but Palmer pouts, Fett delivers a catchphrase, and a character death, which would have been the neighbor who you were talking about who got stabbed in the head, who they did give a name to.
The character death would have been it would have been that, or the parents, Fett's parents.
Or the parents, yeah, that's true.
For character death, because they were pre-established in a previous episode. Yeah,
that's true.
But the oxidolumin one I am ruling against does not qualify.
I feel like we need like a Quinlan does something badass next season. I feel like this is going to start to become a thing.
Well, Quinlan, if our sort of theorizing that Quinlan may take the place of Abe on the show is turns out to be true, in some form, something similar to Abe's role, as a main cast, then definitely we're going to have a few Quinlan squares.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Probably Quinlan Stinger is a good one, because it doesn't make that many appearances.
No, but when it does, it's phenomenal.
It's very good.
Well, thank you everybody for listening to our almost entire hour, maybe a whole hour actually.
Jumbo-sized.
Yeah, thank you. Jumbo-sized episode of The Strain coming at you. What?
You know, they probably saw it in their feed and they're like, oh, a whole hour of Kyle and Blaire talking, and then it was just you and I getting really philosophical about our approaches to TV criticism. Oh, God.
This is why we're a good duo, though, Kyle.
I hope so.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to it. This wraps up our 36th episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our episodes for all of our podcasts of all the episodes of all of our podcasts. Thanks everybody for dealing with that at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at The Strain Pod, and Kyle and I at Kyle Lives TV and at Blaire Lives TV. Remember, both Kyle and Blaire have an E at the end. Send us fan mail at thestrainpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to play #TheStrainBingo with us every week for your chance to be on the show. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.